Good evening, George Will here. Breaking news tonight that transforms the Archewell Foundation from vanity charitable project into active federal criminal investigation with potential prison exposure for both Harry and Meghan. According to sources with direct knowledge of the investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Los Angeles field office has opened a formal criminal investigation into the Archewell Foundation following a referral from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The FBI is investigating alleged misappropriation of approximately $5.3 million in charitable donations between 2021 and 2024, use of foundation funds for personal expenses, inflated payments to vendors with suspected kickback arrangements, and systematic failure to maintain records required under federal nonprofit law. On March 15, 2025, the Archewell Foundation's Board of Directors voted unanimously to dissolve the foundation, cease all operations immediately, and cooperate fully with federal investigators. This is not a strategic reorganization. This is a nonprofit shutting down because federal agents are investigating whether its founders committed crimes. Tonight, we reveal the complete breakdown of the $5.3 million in missing funds the FBI is tracking. We'll show you the four categories of alleged financial misconduct and what evidence federal investigators have gathered. We'll examine the timeline from the IRS referral to the FBI investigation to the foundation's shutdown. We'll expose what former staff told federal investigators about how the foundation operated behind the scenes, and we'll explain what federal criminal attorneys say about the potential charges Harry and Meghan could face and whether this investigation leads to indictment. Before we go any further, I need you to subscribe and hit that notification bell. What you're about to hear involves a federal criminal investigation by the FBI and IRS-CI into a 501c3 charitable organization where donations from the public may have been misappropriated for personal use. This is serious federal crime carrying potential prison sentences. So subscribe now, and let's proceed. Let's start with the complete breakdown of the $5.3 million in allegedly missing or misappropriated funds, as detailed in the IRS criminal investigation referral that triggered the FBI's involvement. According to sources who reviewed the forensic accounting conducted by IRS-CI, the $5.3 million breaks down into four categories of suspicious transactions. Category 1, donations received but not accounted for in foundation spending, $2.4 million. The Archewell Foundation's Public Form 990 tax filings for years 2021, 2022, and 2023 show total donations received of $22.7 million. However, when IRS-CI conducted a detailed audit of the Foundation's bank accounts, expenditure records, and program activities, they could only account for $17.3 million in legitimate charitable spending and operating expenses. The missing $5.4 million should appear either as program expenses, administrative costs, or carried forward as assets on the Foundation's balance sheet. Instead, $2.4 million of the donations received simply vanished from the Foundation's accounting, with no documentation of where the money went. IRS-CI suspects three possible explanations. One, the money was transferred to accounts controlled by Harry and Meghan personally and used for non-charitable purposes. Two, the money was paid to vendors who provided goods or services to Harry and Meghan personally, rather than to the Foundation's charitable programs. Three, the money was paid to vendors at inflated prices with kickbacks returning to Harry and Meghan. All three scenarios constitute criminal misappropriation of charitable funds. Category 2, personal expenses charged to the Foundation, $1.6 million. IRS-CI identified numerous transactions where Foundation funds were used to pay for expenses that appear to be personal to Harry and Meghan rather than legitimate Foundation business. Specific examples documented in the investigation. Travel expenses totaling $680,000 for private jet flights, luxury hotels, and first-class commercial tickets charged to the Foundation. Many of these trips had no documented connection to Foundation programs. For instance, a $45,000 private jet flight to Aspen in January 2023 was charged to the Foundation under the description Board Meeting and Program Development. But the Foundation's board meeting minutes show no meeting occurred in Aspen. Harry and Meghan took a personal ski vacation and charged it to the foundation, security costs totaling $520,000 for Harry and Meghan's personal security detail. While the foundation claimed these were necessary for staff safety during foundation events, the vast majority of the security hours were for protecting Harry and Meghan during their daily personal activities with no connection to foundation business. Legal fees totaling $240,000 for attorneys representing Harry and Meghan in personal legal matters, including their divorce, custody battle, and defamation cases. These legal fees were charged to the foundation under vague descriptions like legal compliance and regulatory consultation, but the actual legal work was for Harry and Meghan's personal lawsuits, not foundation business. Public relations and image consulting totaling $160,000 for firms that managed Harry and Meghan's personal public image and media appearances. These were not communications related to foundation programs. They were personal PR expenses. Total personal expenses improperly charged to foundation, $1.6 million. Category 3, inflated vendor payments with suspected kickbacks, $890,000. The IRSCI audit identified a pattern of payments to vendors that were significantly above market rates for the services provided. In several cases, the vendors were entities with connections to Harry and Meghan's personal associates. The pattern suggests potential kickback arrangements where vendors were overpaid with the excess returning to Harry and Meghan through indirect channels. Example 1. Event planning services. The foundation paid an event planning company $340,000 to organize 2 fundraising galas in 2022. According to industry professionals consulted by IRSCI, comparable events typically cost $80,000 to $120,000 to produce. The foundation paid approximately 3 times market rate. The event planning company is owned by a close friend of Meghan's from her acting days. IRSCI suspects the excess payment was a disguised way to funnel foundation money to Meghan's friend, possibly with an arrangement that some portion would return to Meghan. Example 2, consulting services. The foundation paid a management consulting firm $280,000 in 2023 for strategic planning and organizational development. The consulting firm produced a 40-page report. According to consultants reviewed by IRSCI, such a report would typically cost $30,000 to $50,000. The foundation paid approximately 6 to 8 times market rate. The consulting firm is connected to one of Harry's former advisors. Example 3, graphic design and branding. The foundation paid a design agency $270,000 to create the foundation's logo, website, and marketing materials. Industry professionals estimate fair market value at $40,000 to $60,000 for this work. The foundation paid approximately 5 times market rate. IRSCI is investigating whether these inflated payments represent kickback schemes. Category 4, missing documentation and destroyed records, $430,000 in transactions with no supporting documentation. Federal law requires nonprofits to maintain detailed records of all financial transactions, including receipts, invoices, contracts, and documentation showing the charitable purpose of each expenditure. When IRSCI auditors requested documentation for certain transactions totaling $430,000, the foundation could not produce the required records. In some cases, the foundation claimed records were lost or destroyed. In other cases, the foundation simply had no documentation. Under federal law, if a nonprofit cannot document the charitable purpose of an expenditure, the IRS presumes the money was diverted for personal use. The burden is on the nonprofit to prove otherwise. Harry and Meghan cannot meet that burden for $430,000 in spending. Total allegedly missing or misappropriated funds, $2.4 million unaccounted for, $1.6 million personal expenses, $890,000 inflated payments, $430,000 undocumented transactions, grand total $5.32 million. Now let's examine how the FBI investigation began and what evidence federal investigators have gathered. The investigation originated in November 2023 when a former Archewell Foundation employee we covered in previous reports raised concerns with the IRS about financial irregularities she observed during her employment. That employee, who served as operations manager, filed a detailed complaint with the IRS whistleblower office alleging systematic misuse of foundation funds. The IRS assigned the complaint to IRS Criminal Investigation Division. IRSCI spent approximately 10 months conducting a quiet investigation. They subpoenaed the foundation's bank records from Wells Fargo and other financial institutions. They reviewed all filed Form 990s for years 2020-2023. They interviewed former foundation employees under oath. They conducted surveillance of certain vendors to determine if they were legitimate businesses or shell companies. By September 2024, IRSCI had assembled sufficient evidence to conclude that criminal violations may have occurred. Under federal procedure, when IRSCI identifies potential criminal conduct beyond tax violations, they refer the matter to the FBI. In September 2024, IRSCI referred the Archewell Foundation matter to the FBI Los Angeles Field Office. The FBI opened a case in October 2024 and assigned it to a squad that investigates white-collar financial crimes, including nonprofit fraud. From October 2024 through February 2025, the FBI conducted its own parallel investigation. FBI special agents executed federal search warrants on November 12, 2024, at 3 locations. Location 1, Archewell Foundation's office in Beverly Hills. FBI agents seized computers, file cabinets, financial records, and documents. Location 2, the Montecito residence where Harry and Meghan lived before foreclosure. FBI agents seized personal computers, phones, and documents from a home office. Location 3, the accounting firm that prepared Archewell Foundation's tax filings. FBI agents seized client files and communications between the firm and Harry and Meghan. These search warrants required approval from a federal magistrate judge who reviewed FBI affidavits establishing probable cause that crimes were committed. The fact that a federal judge authorized searches at 3 locations tells us the FBI presented substantial evidence of criminal activity. The FBI also conducted interviews. Between November 2024 and February 2025, FBI agents interviewed 7 former Archewell Foundation employees, 4 vendors who provided services to the foundation, 2 board members who resigned, and multiple donors who contributed to the foundation. These interviews were conducted under oath and are documented in FBI 302 forms that become evidence if the case proceeds to prosecution. The FBI investigation culminated in a February 18, 2025 meeting between FBI agents, IRSCI agents, and assistant U.S. attorneys from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Central District of California. At this meeting, investigators presented their evidence and recommended that the case be presented to a federal grand jury for potential indictment. The U.S. Attorney's Office authorized convening a grand jury. Grand jury proceedings began in late February 2025. Grand jury proceedings are secret, but sources indicate that several witnesses have been subpoenaed to testify, including former foundation employees and the forensic accountant who conducted the IRSCI audit. On March 15, 2025, with the grand jury investigation underway and the criminal exposure becoming clear, the Archewell Foundation's board of directors held an emergency meeting. The board voted unanimously to dissolve the foundation immediately, cease all operations, distribute any remaining assets to other charities as required by law, and issue a public statement announcing the shutdown. The public statement released March 15th said, "Due to changing circumstances and after careful consideration, the Archewell Foundation Board has decided to conclude the foundation's operations. We are grateful to donors and supporters. The foundation's assets will be distributed to other charitable organizations consistent with our mission." This carefully worded statement does not mention the FBI investigation, but the timing makes the connection obvious. Before we continue, I need you to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to hear explains why federal prosecutors believe they can prove criminal intent and why Harry and Meghan could face federal prison time if indicted. Subscribe now. Now let's examine what former foundation staff told federal investigators, because the witness testimony provides direct evidence of how the alleged fraud operated. According to sources familiar with witness interviews, the FBI heard consistent accounts from multiple employees describing systematic financial misconduct. Former Employee 1, the operations manager whose IRS complaint triggered the investigation, told FBI agents Meghan would regularly instruct me to process payments to vendors for services that had nothing to do with foundation programs. When I asked for documentation or explanation of how these expenses serve charitable purposes, I was told not to question it. When I raised concerns about compliance with nonprofit regulations, I was terminated within weeks. This employee provided the FBI with emails, text messages, and internal documents showing Meghan's instructions to make questionable payments. Former employee 2 who worked in finance told FBI agents, "We maintained two sets of books. One set showed expenses categorized in ways that looked appropriate for Form 990 reporting. The other set, which I saw accidentally, showed the real purposes of many expenditures. Personal travel was categorized as program expenses. Meghan's personal legal fees were categorized as regulatory compliance. Security for their house was categorized as event security. When tax season came, we used the sanitized version for the Form 990. This employee provided documents showing both sets of records. Former employee 3, who coordinated donor relations, told FBI agents, multiple large donors asked me for detailed information about how their donations would be used. I requested this information from Meghan and the executive team. I was told to provide vague general answers and not to promise specific program outcomes. Several donors expressed frustration that they couldn't get concrete information. I now understand why. The foundation couldn't tell donors the truth about how their money was being spent. Former employee 4, a program coordinator, told FBI agents, "I was hired to manage charitable programs, but there were almost no actual programs. We did some small grants to other nonprofits. We hosted 2 events, but the vast majority of foundation activity involves staff supporting Harry and Meghan's personal brand and business ventures, not operating charitable programs." The foundation was essentially a vehicle for managing Harry and Meghan's image while taking tax-deductible donations. These witness statements, combined with the documentary evidence seized in the FBI searches, allegedly show a pattern. Harry and Meghan established the Archewell Foundation primarily as a tax-advantaged vehicle for funding their lifestyle and personal expenses while claiming to operate a charity. Donors gave money thinking it would support charitable programs. Instead, the money funded private jets, security, legal fees, and payments to Harry and Meghan's friends through inflated vendor contracts. This is not a good faith disagreement about nonprofit management. This is, if proven, systematic fraud against donors and tax fraud against the federal government. Let's examine what federal criminal law experts say about the potential charges in Harry and Meghan's criminal exposure. Federal Criminal Attorney 1, former federal prosecutor who handled nonprofit fraud cases. The evidence as described supports multiple federal charges. Wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343, because soliciting donations through false representations about how funds would be used transmitted via wire communications is wire fraud. Each fraudulent solicitation is a separate count carrying up to 20 years in prison. Tax fraud under 26 U.S.C. 7206 for filing false Form 990s that misrepresented the foundation's activities and expenditures. This carries up to 3 years per false return. Theft or embezzlement concerning programs receiving federal funds under 18 U.S.C. 66 if the foundation received any federal grants, which carries up to 10 years. Conspiracy to commit these offenses under 18 U.S.C. 371, which carries up to 5 years. If prosecutors decide to charge this case, they'll likely include multiple counts across these statutes. Total potential exposure could be 30-40 years if convicted on all counts, though realistically sentences would run concurrently and be much lower. But even facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison is devastating. Federal Criminal Attorney 2, who represents defendants in white-collar cases. The challenge for Harry and Meghan is proving they didn't have criminal intent. The government must prove willfulness, that they knowingly misused foundation funds. But the evidence from multiple employees saying Meghan instructed them to process improper payments and questioned the categorization makes proving intent relatively easy. Harry and Meghan can't claim they didn't know what was happening when their own employees are testifying that they gave direct instructions. The 2 sets of books allegation is particularly damaging. That shows consciousness of guilt. You don't keep two sets of books unless you know what you're doing is wrong. If that evidence holds up, it's very difficult to defend against criminal charges. Federal Criminal Attorney 3, nonprofit law specialist. Beyond criminal exposure, there are severe civil consequences. The IRS can impose excise taxes on foundation managers who approve improper distributions. That's 10-25% of the improper amount, personally assessed against Harry and Meghan. The IRS can revoke the foundation's tax-exempt status retroactively, making all donations it received taxable income to Harry and Meghan personally. We're talking millions in tax liability. Donors who gave to the foundation can sue for fraud seeking return of their donations. Some of the foundation's major donors were wealthy individuals who gave six-figure amounts. If they sue civilly, Harry and Meghan face additional massive liability. The foundation shutting down doesn't end their legal problems, it just begins them. Let's examine the four scenarios for how this federal investigation concludes over the next 12-18 months. Scenario 1, federal grand jury returns indictments. Harry and Meghan are charged criminally. Case proceeds to trial. The grand jury hears testimony from IRS-CI agents, FBI agents, former foundation employees, and reviews the documentary evidence, including the seized financial records and communications. The grand jury votes to indict. In summer 2025, a federal indictment is unsealed charging Henry Mountbatten Windsor and Rachel Meghan Mountbatten Windsor with wire fraud, tax fraud, and conspiracy. Arrest warrants are issued. Harry and Meghan surrender through their attorneys. They are arraigned in federal court. They plead not guilty. The case proceeds through pretrial proceedings, including motions, discovery, and plea negotiations. Prosecutors offer a plea deal. Plead guilty to one count of tax fraud, accept 18-24 months in federal prison plus restitution. Harry and Meghan reject the plea offer and demand trial. Trial occurs in 2026. Prosecutors present testimony from 7 former employees, forensic accounting evidence, emails, and texts showing Meghan's instructions to process improper payments, and the 2 sets of books. Defense argues Harry and Meghan relied on professional advisors and made good faith mistakes. The jury deliberates. Verdict: guilty on wire fraud and tax fraud counts. Sentencing: Harry sentenced to 36 months in federal prison. Meghan sentenced to 36 months, both ordered to pay $5.3 million in restitution jointly and severally. They report to federal prison to serve their sentences. This is the worst-case scenario, but entirely possible if the evidence is as strong as described. Probability, 30%. Scenario 2, Harry and Meghan negotiate a global resolution avoiding criminal charges through civil settlement and cooperation. Once the grand jury is convened and the evidence is presented, Harry and Meghan's attorneys realize the criminal exposure is severe. They approach the U.S. Attorney's Office proposing a resolution. The proposal: Harry and Meghan admit no criminal wrongdoing, but agree to pay $8 million to settle civil claims from the IRS for tax deficiencies, penalties, and excise taxes. They cooperate fully with any ongoing investigation. They agree to never serve as officers or directors of any 501c3 organization again. They accept personal bans from nonprofit leadership. In exchange, the U.S. Attorney's Office agrees not to seek criminal indictments. This is called a non-prosecution agreement. It's used when prosecutors believe justice can be served without putting defendants in prison, usually in cases where defendants have no criminal history and full restitution is made. The problem is Harry and Meghan don't have $8 million. This scenario requires King Charles to provide the money, possibly as a loan against Harry's future inheritance. If Charles agrees to enable this resolution to avoid his son going to federal prison, it's possible. If Charles refuses, this scenario collapses. Probability, 25%. Scenario 3, grand jury declines to indict. FBI closes case without charges, civil penalties imposed. The grand jury hears all the evidence but decides the case doesn't meet the standard for criminal prosecution. Perhaps the grand jury believes the conduct was improper but not criminal. Perhaps they're sympathetic to Harry and Meghan's circumstances. Grand juries are unpredictable. If the grand jury declines to indict, the FBI closes its criminal investigation. But the IRS still pursues civil penalties. The IRS assesses excise taxes against Harry and Meghan personally for the improper distributions. The IRS revokes the foundation's tax-exempt status for certain years. The IRS sends Harry and Meghan a tax bill for approximately $3 to $4 million, and this is still devastating financially, but avoids criminal conviction and prison. Harry and Meghan would need to negotiate payment terms with the IRS or file bankruptcy if they can't pay. This scenario requires the grand jury to decline prosecution, which is statistically uncommon when federal agents recommend indictment. Probability 20%. Scenario 4, Harry and Meghan flee to UK before indictment, avoid US prosecution, but face exile. If Harry and Meghan learn that indictment is imminent, they could leave the United States and return to the United Kingdom before charges are filed. Once in the UK, they would be beyond the reach of US authorities. The UK does not extradite its own citizens to the United States for nonviolent offenses like fraud. Harry is a British citizen. Meghan could claim British residency through her marriage. If they stay in the UK, they cannot be arrested on US warrants. The US could indict them in absentia and issue international arrest warrants. Those warrants would make it impossible for Harry and Meghan to travel to most countries without risk of arrest. They would be confined to the UK essentially for life. King Charles might provide them housing at a royal property and minimal financial support, but they would be living in exile under the shadow of federal fugitive status. This scenario requires them to abandon their lives in California and accept permanent exile to avoid prosecution. It's drastic but possible if criminal charges appear certain. Probability 25%. So here's where we stand tonight. The FBI Los Angeles field office is conducting a criminal investigation into the Archewell Foundation following an IRSCI referral documenting $5.3 million in allegedly missing or misappropriated charitable funds. The $5.3 million breaks down into four categories: $2.4 million in donations received but unaccounted for in foundation spending, $1.6 million in personal expenses improperly charged to the foundation, including travel, security, legal fees, and PR, $890,000 in inflated vendor payments with suspected kickback schemes, $430,000 in transactions with missing or destroyed documentation. The FBI executed search warrants at 3 locations in November 2024, seizing computers, financial records, and communications. The FBI interviewed 7 former employees who provided testimony about systematic financial misconduct. A federal grand jury was convened in February 2025 and is hearing evidence. The Archewell Foundation shut down on March 15, 2025, voting to dissolve operations and cooperate with investigators. Former employees told the FBI that Meghan instructed improper payments. The foundation maintained 2 sets of books, and charitable programs were minimal while most activity supported Harry and Meghan's personal brand. Federal prosecutors are considering charges including wire fraud carrying 20 years, tax fraud carrying 3 years per count, and conspiracy carrying 5 years. 4 scenarios: criminal indictment and trial with possible prison sentences 30%, negotiated civil settlement avoiding charges if King Charles provides $8 million 25%, grand jury declines indictment but IRS imposes civil penalties 20%, Harry and Meghan flee to UK before charges and live in permanent exile 25%. Federal criminal attorneys say the evidence supports prosecution and that Harry and Meghan face serious criminal exposure if the witness testimony and documentary evidence hold up. Now I turn it over to you. What do you think happens with this FBI investigation? Type "lock them up" if you believe Harry and Meghan misused charitable donations for personal expenses and should face criminal prosecution. Type "exile" if you think they'll flee to the UK before indictment to avoid US prison. Type "Charles pays" if you believe King Charles will provide millions to settle the case and avoid his son going to federal prison. If you believe that charitable foundations exist to help people in need, not to fund celebrity lifestyles, that donors who give to charity deserve to know their money is being used properly, and that using a nonprofit as a personal piggy bank is fraud that should be prosecuted, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because this federal investigation is ongoing right now. The grand jury is hearing evidence. Witnesses are testifying under oath, and we'll soon learn whether the grandson of Queen Elizabeth II and his wife will be indicted by a federal grand jury for misappropriating $5 million in charitable donations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation.